testimony given. Probably not likely. Presiding officer shall terminate any comments, questions, or discussions that are not relevant to the subject of the hearing. That's in the rules. Right? I'm not expecting that as presiding officer I'm going to seek to terminate anyone's comments. However, I am going to ask you to those testifying to limit the speaking time to 5 minutes. We'll be flexible. In an effort to satisfy our rules for testimony in public hearing, we do have these cards. I'll invite people to speak who have submitted a card in the order that the cards were received, and I will try really hard to pronounce your names right. It is our intent to hear from those who have yet to speak before hearing from anyone who would like to speak. That's it. I think we're ready to proceed, so I'd like to ask Jim Gallagher to step up and briefly discuss the status and operation of drown stand and doll stand.
Thank you, Ken. Is this on here?
It is.
Thank you. My name is Jim Gallagher. I am Chief Engineer, Chief of DMV for the Department of Environmental Services. DES owns doll and drown stands. We operate that dam. I have a staff of operators that come out here. Many of you probably have seen them do the maintenance and do the operations, whether you're putting in stop blocks, drawing it down in the fall and filling it back up in the spring, and then do flood response as well. I just wanted to give you a little sense of to put the sort of the drawdown in context. The state owns 277 dams. The Department of Environmental Services has 113 of those. And we also operate the dams that are owned by the Fish and Game Department. That's about another 100. So the department, our operators are responsible for 200-something dams. Out of all those dams, all those 237 dams, only 51 of those have a seasonal drawdown. And they're mostly the ones that DES owns. Those drawdowns are typically anywhere from like 1 to 4 feet. There are only 5 of those dams that we draw down to the depth of the drawdown Pawtuckaway. And 2 of those dams, actually, the folks around the lakes in 2 of those dams have asked us to re-examine the depth of those drawdowns. These drawdowns that we do are really typically holdovers from when the mills own these dams. You know, we get these 2 dams in 1955 from the folks who own the mill owners, essentially, who owned those dams and stored water and provided it to their mills downstream in the Lamprey River. And so they used to draw down these lakes to power their mills. And these drawdowns were largely to about a 7-foot depth. They might have been done in the summertime, but we have kept that over the years. And over the years, I've been with the department now for about 13 years. In these 13 years, we've started re-examining that practice. In the case of Pawtuckaway, what we do with our 7-foot drawdown is evacuate 60% of the water in that reservoir that goes downstream. And so that the Fish and Game is concerned with that practice. And in some of these other places where we have these deep drawdowns, that the fish population now is more concentrated. And as a result, they eat each other, they compete for other food sources. And so you may not have, well, we have a healthy fishery in Pawtuckaway. They feel maybe not as healthy as it could be. So they've asked us to re-examine these things. In the 13 years I've been with the department, we've eliminated drawdown on one lake entirely and reduced the drawdown in several others. And so, you know, based actually on our experience this spring, you know, honestly, I was very concerned that we were not going to get this lake filled. You know, we had only 2 inches of rainfall total in the months of February, March, and April up to the 3rd week of April. Normally we get 3.5 to 4 inches of rain each month. So we had a deficit of about 11 inches of rain, and I really was concerned that we weren't going to get this filled up. Pawtuckaway Lake is a tough one to fill up, honestly, based on the size of the lake, the volume of water that we need to fill it up, and the size of the watershed that drains down into Pawtuckaway. So when I rank it, it's probably in the top 20% of all of these 50 lakes that I have to refill in terms of difficulty of filling. So back when we had this similar experience, back in 1999, we had a very dry spring, and we didn't get it filled up then. You know, we missed it, I think, by 6 inches. There was some interest on the part of Lakeshore owners to take a look at that practice, you know, and we did. We had a hearing similar to what we're going to have here tonight. And based on the input we got from residents, we took a survey. You know, we had 45% of the folks who responded to the survey, and 52% of the residents around the lake responded to it. 45% of those wanted to keep the 7-foot drawdown. The remaining 55% were divided about how deep it ought to be, whether it be 5 feet or 6 feet or something different. But based on that, well, we kept the practice. But as I say, even absent this issue that's going to be spoken about here with this water management plan, the conflict with the water management plan with our existing lake level decision dating back to 2000, we'd be re-examining this because Fish and Game keeps coming back to us and asking us to take a look at reducing the drawdowns where we can to improve the fisheries in our lakes. So with that, I'm just going to turn the program over. I'm going to be here all night listening to the commentary. And if you have any questions, about the operations of the maintenance of the dam, condition of the dam, be glad to answer that after the hearing. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Just a reminder, if you are going to speak, please step up to the microphone. We can adjust that as necessary, but you need to be within about 3 inches of the mic for it to really pick up as well. Good. All right, I'd like to ask Wayne Ives to provide a brief presentation on the draft water management plan. Take this on. He doesn't have an extension cord, it's just like that. Try to keep Wayne on show lead.
There you go. Brilliant way to get the anticipation up. Good evening. My name is Wayne Ives. I am the in-stream flow specialist for the Department of Environmental Services, and I'm here tonight to present to you an explanation of how the Pawtuckaway Lake winter water levels affect the Lamprey in-stream flow program. The Pawtuckaway Lake, as we've heard already, I guess, has 2 dams, one that drains out and water's released to the North River. The Dolph Dam drains out to the Pawtuckaway River. Both of these are tributaries to the Lamprey River. And the Lamprey River is the focus of the in-stream flow program's pilot program for which we now have this water management plan. The water management plan that we've developed retains more water in the wintertime, so we're trying to reduce the drawdown to provide storage. And the purpose for that is to make storage available for a possible release. And the reason for trying to have a possible release is to restore the natural stream flow patterns. The storage is available from the 2000 method of managing the lake does not provide enough volume to allow this restoration of stream flow patterns or the release that we need to make that happen. So DES is considering revising the winter water level so that we do have storage for a release. Why should we be managing stream flows? Well, the real reason to manage these stream flows is to maintain the water quality. The purpose of the releases is specifically to address impacts to aquatic life from falling away from that pattern of natural stream flows. So our purpose then is to mimic the natural stream flows, regular runs with peaks and valleys of stream flow. Why do the streams fall out of natural flow patterns? Well, there's obvious reasons. One of them is withdrawals by water users. Another is the storage and release of water by dams. Then there's another problem caused by land use changes that change the stormwater runoff, change the amount of impervious surfaces, change the way that water is released into the river, and the timing of that. The goal then, if that's our goal to manage, to maintain that natural pattern of stream flows, then we need methods to address each of these issues. So we need to be able to reduce, displace, or remove the withdrawals from having impacts on the stream flow. We also need to manage the diversions by dams. Land use changes are not part of the in-stream flow program, so that is not encompassed by this water management plan. The management under the water management plan in the in-stream flow program that addresses withdrawals has two parts. One's a conservation plan to reduce waste and losses of water. The second is a water use plan, and this is where we reduce or try to get the water use to stop having an impact on the surface water. The methods of doing that, one is to take public water supplies and have all of the people who use public water supplies reduce or stop outside watering during periods of low flow. And the other part of that is to take public water supplies completely off the river when stream flows are low, so that they're not impacting the water anymore. The plan then is for them to find alternate water supplies, either storage or wells or other sources of water during that time period. Dam management is also a part of the program, and dams affect both the lake level and the downstream flow. This is a picture of Drowns Dam. It could be today. We were up there just now, and what you see here is the passive management by the spillways when the water level is above the full pool, and you see the stop log bay where active management by Dam Bureau is done by operating the stop logs in and out to raise and lower the water levels and release water. Jim mentioned that we were very concerned this spring. The water levels at this point should have been up over the top of those spillways, and they were 2 feet down. Here you can see how concerned we were by the fact that the stop logs were full up to the full pool level, not allowing any water out. And the result of that downstream is that there's virtually no water leaving Pawtuckaway Lake to provide water for what would have been 21 square miles of watershed draining down through these tributaries to the Pawtuckaway River, to the Pawtuckaway River and North River, going to Lamprey River. This happened to be an extreme year, so this is not going to be the case exactly every year, but every year the lake has to be refilled, and the water that's supposed to be going downstream for the rivers is not there because we're using it to fill the lake up. So to a lesser degree, this happens every year. Looking at management of lakes, looking at management of streams, they're not a one-to-one comparison. A very small effect on a lake can have a very large impact on stream flow. Pawtuckaway Lake has a very huge volume of water in it. So at that, as an example, 1/10 of a foot of water can provide 9,000 gallons per minute for 2 days, which is what we provide a 2-day pulse in order to reset the natural flow patterns. This can be a very significant resetting of the natural patterns of the stream flow. Now, given that, we still need to manage for surface water quality for lakes. So we still need to make sure that we're keeping our lake conditions within the natural patterns of water level and changes in water level that affect lakes. So it's not simply a focus on how much water the stream should get, but we're also including in the water management plan the protection for lake level conditions. DES has considered under both scenarios, the current operating conditions and the changed operating conditions, the effects that may happen to aquatic plants or how ice damage may affect people's docks, the timing and access of shoreline property and docks for maintenance. The department has conducted a new bathymetry study in order to get good quality data. We've conducted additional studies and recalculated numbers for the flood management aspects of the lake. And we've looked at both in the lake and in the stream how wildlife and fish may either be improved or impacted. The specific changes, we want to go from 7 feet of storage in Pawtuckaway being drained out during the fall to only 4.82 feet being drained out in the fall. The reason we have 4.82 feet is what we've calculated using the bathymetry information we have and the configuration of the dam to allow the size release that we need to go out in the time that we need it to go out. This is a chart showing the operating plan for Pawtuckaway Lake. What you see here, the purple line that's got the circle identifying it, is about 29 years of record for the median water level of the conditions that have happened in Pawtuckaway Lake. The beginning of this graph starts in September, and the end of it goes till the end of April. So this is showing you the winter drawdown period in particular. What you see here, then, is the historical conditions that Dam Bureau uses as a guide to manage Pawtuckaway Lake's water levels. That's the purple line that's highlighted now. I've superimposed, or I've replaced a section of a real year's water levels. So beginning up at the beginning, coming down to here, this was actually what happened a few years ago, and again at the end was what happened a few years ago. And what we have here is I've replaced what happened in the middle during that with what I proposed for the drawdown as an example. If a release were required, that would draw the water down a little bit more. What you can see here is at a certain point, the water levels are back to the same conditions that you've had all along, and that date is the beginning of March, at a time when there's still ice on the lake. And the reason that the water levels have to be raised by that point is that in order to get to the summer full pool, we need to start raising the water levels, start storing water again in the middle of February. These black triangles represent times and water levels when ice conditions were still on the lake. This is not the end of ice, this is when ice was still on that was recorded in the Dam Bureau's records. What you can see here is that these conditions are occurring after the management that I've proposed as a change have already ended. The releases that we do for the in-stream flow program and the water management plan are released for fish and wildlife and riparian vegetation. They're not for downstream water withdrawals. As I've said, we're off the river with water withdrawals before we release water from the dams. The current management of this dam is a side project, as a side information that we generated as we developed this plan to release water from Pawtuckaway Lake, because we recognize that the current management of Pawtuckaway Lake is far outside the natural variation of lake levels. And so reducing that drawdown is going to be a much more natural condition for the lake. So in summary, the change in the water level strikes a balance between supporting the public's interest, the public's water resources interest on the lake and in the river. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Wayne. I am now going to open the public hearing. I've got what I count as 34 cards. First up is Pam Kelly, to be followed by Jim Kelly and Ed Katowski. So, Pam. Thank you.
I've been a Pawtuckaway Lake resident since 1999, and when a petition was filed with the DES Water Division in the fall of 1999 regarding the modification of the winter drawdown, a survey was conducted of lake residents about their opinions on the matter. We are aware that despite the well-reasoned decision that was issued in December of 2000, declaring that no change to the drawdown would occur, there is now a plan to modify the drawdown drastically. And we've just been hearing something about that and the reasons for it. Excuse me. We who are members of the Pawtuckaway Lake Improvement Association, as well as those who are visitors to the lake for recreational purposes every year, are concerned that a decision of such import be made with as much information as possible. The impact of this kind of change will be far-reaching, and we hope that as much effort as possible is made to gather data about some of these huge ramifications. Let me just mention two. And one is the possibility of spring flooding. And like many homes or camps on the lake, we have a dock that is sensitive to water levels. Twice it was battered and destroyed by unprecedented spring floods, and twice we've had to reconstruct it. I believe that retaining so much water in the lake over the winter will only heighten the probability of spring flooding, even in years when snowmelt and rains are not as copious as they were in May of 2006 and April of 2007. Another point I want to mention is the threat of invasive weed growth. We at Pawtuckaway Lake are well educated on the hazards of exotic and invasive species entering and taking over the lake, as they have done and continue to do on many other nearby lakes. We know that prevention is crucial to keeping them out of our lake, but we've also learned, as have other lake associations, that a deep drawdown of water over the winter helps us kill off and remove any such plants that may appear. This lake belongs to the state of New Hampshire, and it is a big attraction for recreation through the state park. It's inconceivable that the state would now thoughtlessly jeopardize the health of one of its most treasured resources through this reckless plan that the DES intends to put into action. And yet that's exactly what's happening. The DES has so far failed to articulate a compelling reason for its reversal of the 2000 decision to retain the 7-foot fall drawdown of our lake water. There appears to be some flimsy expectation that it would be a good idea to ensure a large water impoundment at Pawtuckaway over the winter in case winter releases are needed. Remember, it was a possible release? In case those winter releases are needed downstream to ensure drinking water supply for Durham and maybe for other uses that are unclear. Given the strong likelihood of damage to the lake's ecosystem and property, there's not a shred of empirical evidence to support such a decision, which shows a shocking indifference to interests other than those downstream. I beg you to hold off on implementing this part of the plan until evidence may be gathered on the real need for water releases during the winter. If it turns out that such releases are not necessary, and then the threatened harm to Pawtuckaway may be avoided, surely the risk of damage to the lake cannot justify the remote and untested possibility of benefit downstream. In addition, other avenues to supplement the water supply to Durham may be explored in the meantime, as it does not appear that this has been done in any serious fashion. Finally, I'd like to remind you that the DES as a state agency is required by law to protect Pawtuckaway Lake and not just treat it as a convenient water impoundment. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Next up is Jim Kelly, followed by Ed Katowski and Robert Seymour.
Yep, I'm Jim Kelly. I'm with her. I've also been on the lake since 1999, and it seems to me that what has really motivated the DES to begin this process and to make this change to long-standing policy is not really being addressed properly here. There are several reasons to go forward with a winter drawdown. One might be environmental. Another might be public policy, and yet another might be economic. I do not believe that DES has made its case for an environmental justification. To do so would mean that DES had submitted a valid data set that supported its theory of what is to be gained by this action. The theory set forth so far has been shaky at best, and the data is either incomplete or does not support the stated goals. Where is the science? Where is the rigor of gathering data? We have heard Fish and Game invoked. Have they done studies? They're concerned. What is their concern? We have a vague concern. And Mr. Ives showed us a slide, and he said that they had, subsequent to the meeting that we had last year, the PLIA meeting, they had done more studies, and they had covered these other areas. Well, there are those of us who've been following this issue who have been waiting to see these studies. I haven't seen them, and I don't know what they say. We have been promised studies. They have not been done. We have been told of possible outcomes. but there has been no offer of what the probabilities are that these outcomes will actually happen. It looks to me as if your position is, trust us on this, we're pretty sure, we know what we're doing, and besides, it's natural. I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. Meddling with the lake levels without understanding the environmental impact is a recipe for ecological disaster and economic hardship. So, if the science does not support an environmental justification for the drawdown, perhaps the real reasons that this decision is before us have to do with public policy and economics. If this is the case, then let's put these issues on the table and discuss them and stop trying to pretend that there is some compelling environmental justification for the drawdown. If the real reason we are here is that communities downstream want Pawtuckaway water and they don't care to pay to develop alternate sources, then just say so. Admit that this is a public policy issue and not an environmental issue. Is this about being green, or is it about the color of money? Because if it is, then we need to gather new data so that we can weigh competing interests. The degradation of Pawtuckaway will impact local real estate and tourism throughout this region. Those costs need to be evaluated against whatever plans the downstream communities intend to put in place. How do we begin such evaluation? I would submit that the first step would be a repeat of the survey of lake residents which took place when DES last looked at this issue. 12 years have elapsed since the first survey. Many summer camps have been converted to year-round residences, improvements have been made to existing properties, and the population of lake dwellers has increased. We who live on the lake and love it have, through the PLIA, become educated about water quality monitoring, invasive weed and algae growth, shoreline conservation, lake stewardship, phosphate loading, septic issues, and wildlife protection. We are stakeholders, key stakeholders in this process, and our experience with all these lake issues would be reflected in a survey if it were taken today. We understand that budget constraints may be the reason you do not plan to undertake such a survey, reassessing the impacts of a winter drawdown. We would like to offer to conduct our own survey at our expense and provide the results to you to be considered with whatever other evidence you are gathering. If the plan you are proposing is to be truly reflective of the needs of this region and this watershed, the needs of all, Nottingham and its neighbors must inform your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next up is Ed Patowski, followed by Robert Seymour and is it P. Harold? I didn't have a first name on it. Paul Harold. Thank you. Ed.
That's a tough act to follow. Yeah. Okay. First, I just have a few questions. First off, you mentioned a bathymetric study. When was that done? I think Wayne.
It was done spring or maybe June of 2011.
2011. So you've been studying the river for about 10 years, and the lake just recently.
Right.
Okay. If you only need 0.1 of a foot to get a pulse downstream, as call it, why do you need to retain 2.2 feet more in the lake?
Yeah.
I can answer that, but it's not really the time for answering it. But in
Wayne, what we're doing is receiving testimony. We will definitely consider everything and respond to the question. So, but that's part of the decision. Try to collect all of it.
Okay, well, I just have more questions, so then, because this just brings up a whole host of questions, I'll hold on to a question and answer period.
Well, if you could, you could read your questions into the record, and by all means, please submit them in writing.
All right.
And give us an opportunity to respond to
Go
the
ahead,
questions.
Ed. We want to hear your question.
The last question I have is, this is a winter drawdown hearing. When are we going to hear about the other seasons of drawdown? And finally, if you ruin docks and waterfront property, are you going to compensate the people for their losses? Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Seymour, to be followed by Paul Hurd.
Robert Seymour, from the lake since '81. My concern in the winter is not only not drawing the lake down far enough, but bringing the level up and down during the winter. That creates quite a safety hazard. Hundreds of people, enjoy the lake in the winter. Ice fishing, snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, and so forth. 2 years ago, for some reason in January, the lake was brought up about a foot. Now what happens is the ice is locked down, and it doesn't move. The water comes up over the ice, and it makes a very hazardous condition, especially at that time there was about 2 feet of snow. Everybody was stuck out there, nobody could move. Plus it created, now when the ice starts to lift, open holes out of the lake. And it made the lake virtually impassable. So changing the level of the water in the winter it's just bad. It's bad. It makes the lake, renders it as useless. So it's got to stay at one level. So you say you're going to lower it down to 4.8 feet or so. But if you're going to end up doing that, keep it there. Don't change it up and down. Just the normal rise. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Robert. Paul Harrell, to be followed by Paul Romano, and then Clayton Button.
I just have a question for the board. We're talking about winter flows. When we're going to talk about summer, we're going to have a summer drawdown too. We can't discuss that.
I don't know the answer to the question, to be quite honest with you. The purpose of the hearing was to discuss winter drawdowns.
Yeah, you're going to have a summer drawdown too. We can't discuss that tonight, right?
We can discuss anything, but your testimony can address.
I'm just interested in that tonight. Probably you got to come back in the summer for that.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Paul Romano, followed by Clayton Button, and then John Moore.
Hi, my name is Paul Romano, and I'm more or less concerned what I'm seeing, concerned with heads down by you people, concerned by misstatements that you people made. You talked about the water level in 1999. You people were the cause of that. It wasn't lack of rain. You people never put the boards in. And now you're asking us to trust you again. The whole idea of you drawing down a lake without proper or credible information that you can pass to us just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. So I've got more, but I'll hold it till the end.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Clayton Button, to be followed by John Moore.
My name is Clayton Button. I've lived on the lake for 29 years. And I must admit, I missed the May of 2011 meeting because it was on lake drawdown. That's winter drawdown, but summer drawdown is even more important. And it seemed like that was slipped by us. For the last day and a half, I've gone on your DES website with all a list of material pertaining to the Lamprey Water Management Plan. I read everything. One question I had, I saw no responses to the questions you received from individuals back in May of 2011. Where did you respond? And if so, where are the responses?
I believe that the responses will be issued when the management plan goes final. That will be part of the actual decision.
That's brilliant.
Okay, in the course of reviewing this complete list of data on the website, there was like 40 entries. I ran across one 3-pager from U.S. Department of Interior National Park Service. Now, they're a pretty substantial outfit, and I was impressed with the points they made. First they agree with your 3-part plan, which is a conservation plan for water users, water use plans to shift, spread, and reduce water use, and finally, dam management. They go on to say in item 5, we support the statement of the plan that communities with affected municipal water supplies need to adopt ordinances to allow for mandatory water conservation. We support the notice that the plan should clearly establish a maximum lake drawdown for Mendham and Pawtuckaway for the June 20 through July 20 through August 6 summer period. They're saying you should clearly establish a maximum so that we'd have something to go by. It's just too loosey-goosey at this point. A stated maximum drawdown supported by a clear analysis of the actual likely cumulative effects based on the period of record would be beneficial. Okay, item 7, the NPS Park Service supports the immediate implementation of the first 2 phases of this plan, conservation plans and water use plans. This is the real bread and butter of the plan. Reduce as much reasonable man's direct water impact upon stream flow during times of extreme ecological stress. So they support the implementation of the first 2 steps. They don't say they support the dam management plan. The NPS Park Service believes there should be a scientific reevaluation of the 2-day relief pulse concept. 2 aspects of this seem overly troubling. A, overwintering period. During this time of year, flows are relatively high, and man's combined influence on water flows are extremely small relative to overall flow. The value of a relief pulses during this time period seems particularly suspect. In addition, the 1.5 feet of less winter drawdown in Pawtuckaway is very controversial and particularly destructive to dogs, etc. This deserves to be reevaluated. And then finally, one completely different approach to potential dam release would be to quantify the degree to which human cause in the watershed are contributing to the extreme low flow scenario. Back in when I looked over the 327-page plan in the summary, the final sentence, the final paragraph went, we see this as a work in progress, which will be changed when there are more water users downstream. So you can figure why we're nervous on the lake. Thank you.
Thanks, Clayton. John Moran, followed by Bill Natishan. I hope I got that. Natishan. Thank you.
I just like to say, I'd like you guys.
Good.
I just like you guys to keep that to 7 feet. It's the way it's been. Obviously, a lot of people like it. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, Bill Natishan, followed by Herb Bernard. Okay.
I thought you'd go for 3 minutes. I'm Bill Natishan. I've been on the lake since 1973. My wife and I have been on the lake since 1973. I have more questions, obviously, than answers. But there's a couple of things that bothered me a year or so ago when you came to the association to discuss this, and I asked a simple question. I thought, you did an evaluation downstream, but what kind of an evaluation did you do on the lake as to the effect of lake wildlife, microscopic elements on the lake, and more importantly, weeds, which has already been addressed? Never got a result from that, or if anything was done. I don't have a definition of natural pattern. You addressed it in your presentation, Wayne, but there's no dating of the data. Your presentation didn't address dating of the data to determine natural pattern. It's not defined, and we have no database to evaluate what that means. Now, if your database goes back to Newmarket Manufacturing Company, and the fact that Mr. Gallagher made a reference that water was let out to run the facilities in Newmarket and further downstream, the water level at that point was nowhere near what the water level is today, for the last 20 years, or since the 2 new dams were put in. So I'm curious about that definition, because that appears to be what is the driver here, in my view. And one last thing, what kind of evaluation has been done on the dams themselves? If you're not taking out as much water as we've taken out in the past, that to me means more ice. More ice can affect dams. These are pretty powerful dams, I must agree with you. But I don't believe they've felt the pressure of the ice that will be in the lake with the additional water that will be in the lake. And your presentation didn't address anything in that regard. Now, obviously, if one of these dams happens to spring a serious leak, then who cares about what kind of water is coming in the springtime, because it's not going to fill up the lake, obviously. You also have another concern, I have a concern regarding the Pawtuckaway State Park and the effect it is having on the water levels and the use of water at the park. You haven't addressed that. To me, and I would agree with those who came before, the data isn't presentable to us to arrive at some kind of a sound professional conclusion or support your conclusion. You know, your presentation was very brief, and that bothered me, certainly. It certainly bothers me that we make statements here, but we don't get answers. Or if we're going to get answers, it's going to be not transparent, the big word these days, until the moment that you make a decision and somebody signs a piece of paper to say this is what you're going to do. Now, if we don't get that information, then this is a joke. We're all here tonight, it's a joke.
That's right.
And you people are servants, you folks are servants to the people of New Hampshire, as our selectmen here tonight are serving the people of Nottingham. And I don't say that in a nasty kind of way, but we are the recipients of whatever you come up with. And yet we don't have a base to agree or disagree. And I'm sure Many other people are going to be talking about many other things on the lake. But most of us go back a goodly amount of time. And this criterion, we've seen the lake. We've been on the lake. We fish on the lake. We swim there. We boat on it. We know what the lake looks like. We know when we see something growing somewhere, it shouldn't be there. And it all has to do with water levels. It has to do with many, many things. This town and this association has spent thousands of dollars making sure that the boaters on the lake, and as well as those who come on during the day, have a safe boat, have proper equipment, and more important than that even, has check their weeds and see if there's any milfoil or any other kind of exotic weed they may have. Now, we've been doing this for a long time, a very long time, and we've been very fortunate that I believe, and I think that it's well documented, that as a matter of fact, we have prevented what's going on in other lakes. But that doesn't mean that it stops. You know, we have the data and the database that you're using, and I'm sure you have some basis for it. We just don't have that kind of information, and we would be a lot more comfortable with maybe what you're doing if we did have that information ahead of time, not at the midnight hour of decision making. Thank you very much.